All right, now let's get analysis on this. We're now joined via Teams by Dr Emmanuel Matambo, Research Director at the University of Johannesburg's Center for Africa-China Studies. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, to what extent will this pact between these Sahel nations allow them to cooperate against the threats of armed rebellion or external aggression, as they say? And how do you see it being effective?
Good afternoon, Unati. Good afternoon to your viewers as well, and thank you for inviting me. As you have rightly put it, well, the pact was signed on Saturday, and then just apart from the clauses that are in the pact itself, it is also politic to look at the region in which the pact was signed, in the Litako-Goma region, which is a geographical area where the three countries of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali actually meet. It is an area that has been unstable for quite some time now because of extremist violence. So the first test that will be put to this pact is already underway, actually, because last week the Tuareg rebellion resumed again in Mali, and the rebels claimed that they had already overtaken the region, the city of Borem in Mali itself. Now, this is an area where Wagner forces, in consonance with the forces of Mali, have been fighting the rebels and fighting jihadism as well. So this already shows that, yes, there is some vulnerability in Wagner, even if there was this hullabaloo about bringing in the Russians as the French were being thrown out. So this pact now has already this litmus test, and it is from there then that probably some people will put a lot of importance to the pact itself, and maybe some other people who are affiliated to it will really seize onto it and support it. But this is a test that is in place. Whether or not it will be sustainable will be judged by how well the coordinated forces of the three countries will attend to threats such as what is currently underway in northern Mali.
In fact, you know, when the signing did occur on that particular day, all three nations in agreement that their priority is, in fact, to fight against terrorism in the three countries. Let's talk now about, the region itself. You know, Ecowas had been threatening, to use force against the three nations. As relations in the bloc remain strained, what do you think should be the next move from Ecowas, essentially?
Well, ECOWAS has been kind of pinned in, probably mostly because ECOWAS member states such as Nigeria have actually been struggling themselves with fighting against extremist violence. So obviously ECOWAS has to get its house in order. And then we shouldn't also distract ourselves from the fact that unfortunately these seizures of power have actually received the mandate of a very big chunk of citizenry, at least from what we are able to perceive on television. So how organizations such as ECOWAS are going to make sure that what they preach actually has the buy-in of ordinary citizens as well? Because we saw at the initial stages when Nigeria was threatening that ECOWAS will mount a force against Niger, the Senate in Nigeria actually said, we are not going to endorse this. We are opting for a diplomatic solution to what was happening in Niger. So that is just a conundrum in which ECOWAS itself finds itself in. So it has no option at the moment but to negotiate with those three members of the Sahel region. And I think of utmost importance at this moment also is to make sure that they commit these military leadership to certain reasonable timeframes that will see a return to civilian government. I don't think at the moment that a military or an aggressive approach will be to anyone's benefit, ECOWAS or these errant members.
In a recent interview with the SABC, the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, in fact, telling my colleague, just talking about the instability in the region and raising some pertinent, concerns around the social contract, saying that it is concerning that coups, which were always frowned upon, are now being celebrated. So to what does this actually speak to? I mean, a lot of people have been saying that this is a rise of dissent, essentially, on the so-called Western democracy, which actually it isn't.
Well, the problem that we have seen, especially since the triumph of liberal democracy, as people call it, from 1989 to 1991, is that most of the foreign imposed democratic practices on the African continent tend to underscore mostly voting. Now, voting is just a perfunctory exercise that to a great extent in Africa happens maybe from the regions of 4 to 5 or 7 years in every African country. Now, that is not enough as democracy. So voting is not enough as democracy. I think what we want to see as Africans is that there has to be a tangible advantage to democracy. As long as people confine themselves to going for elections every 5 years and pretending that that is democracy, that will not be enough. So democracy has to make sure that it secures food security for Africans, education, health, and also just general security. So in Niger, for example, Niger have been making tremendous strides towards democracy, but unfortunately, the rise of insurgencies were not being effectively dealt with by a civilian government. The same was happening as well in Burkina Faso. Now, ordinary citizens who are every day faced with the rise of extremist violence will think that maybe where the civilian government is failing to secure security, then maybe people who are actually trained in that specific area, such as soldiers, will have a better prospect of fighting extremist violence. Obviously, unfortunately, military leaderships, once they are ensconced in the corridors of power, do not leave. But this is also an indictment of a democracy that is very limited, a democracy that limits itself to voting, rather than a democracy that looks holistically at what welfare for ordinary Africans really means.